Good afternoon and welcome to Washington Week's digital show, Washington Week Recommends. I'm Yamiche Alcindor, and each week I recommend great reporting that I think deserves your attention. And today I want to highlight a revealing and thorough piece about Republican Governor Ron DeSantis' controversial efforts to overhaul Florida's election system ahead of his possible run for president. And Fabiola Sines, reporter at Fox News, explains all of this and more in her article. It's titled, quote, Ron DeSantis' War on Woke in Florida Schools Explained. And Fabiola joins me now. So Fabiola, thanks so much for being here and welcome to Washington Week Recommends. So you break this down so well. You have all these different titles of the ways that he's going after K through 12 and transgender rights. Just break down a bit of the overall thesis of your article and what's driving this.
Yamiche, thank you so much for having me today. I'm really happy to be here. And I just want to say it's been an eventful Black History Month to start us off in 2023. But what's driving this is that we're in a time in America where we're facing a conservative backlash. Beginning in 2020, we saw conservatives, actually starting with Donald Trump, just unleash a number of laws that ban the teaching of divisive concepts. And so those concepts are related to race, they're related to sex, they're related to gender and sexual orientation. And so Donald Trump started off by saying, we can't have any kind of diversity, equity, inclusion programs in the federal government. And so that kind of trickled down to states where Republican governors started saying, you know what, let's do this in schools as well. And so in states like Florida, states like Indiana, we see laws where teachers are banned from talking about divisive concepts that people think can make young white children uncomfortable about their race or boys uncomfortable about their gender. And so we're really seeing gag orders in schools. And so that's the context of all of this. And then this year, what we started seeing was just a doubling down on this in Florida, especially. And so the College Board released its official framework for its new AP African American Studies course. And we all thought that that was something to be celebrated. But then when it released the framework, there was just a lot of controversy. And so it was controversial because when people started looking through the framework, they noticed that a number of controversial hot button issues were actually removed from the framework. And so that was concerning because they were the very concepts and topics that Ron DeSantis in Florida and his education administration had railed against for some time now.
And so many people might be familiar with book banning or the AP African American Studies course because it's been happening at least for a couple of weeks now. But what your article does, which is why I wanted to have you on, was it really breaks down that this is much bigger than just an AP course. There's all these different ways that Ron DeSantis is really influencing education in Florida. And I should say, for folks out there, I'm a Florida native, so I'm very interested in what's going on in Florida and education there. So first, you talk about K through 12 public schools and book banning. Talk a bit about how he's trying to put his hand in things there when you talk about K through 12.
Absolutely. So with K through 12, we see Ron DeSantis kind of going hard. His administration is just doubling down again on the book ban. So it was actually in 2021 that Ron DeSantis first introduced legislation to say like these divisive concepts can't be taught in classrooms. And then this year, we see his education administration actually following through on these measures. So when it comes to book banning, basically a number of different districts are telling teachers that they can't select the books for their school library. So they have to wait for a librarian, someone who's considered a media specialist in Florida, to actually go through and approve the books that can be contained in their library. And so we're seeing a bunch of photos spreading on Twitter of libraries that have been covered up with paper, they're taped up, books removed. And so it's a lengthy process for teachers and librarians to kind of go through and figure out whether these books can be approved or not and whether they're appropriate for students. And also students can't even bring like e-readers to class in certain districts because whatever they're reading hasn't been approved. And it's a little scary because some of the books that we're seeing that have been removed, for example, like a book about Roberto Clemente was removed, and DeSantis responded to this yesterday and saying, oh, that was a joke, like the district is just taking it too far. But it's concerning because it's just unclear what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And teachers can actually face consequences and even jail time for this.
And you talk about the idea as you talk about teachers. One of the other headlines that you have in your article is he's dismantling tenure and tamping down on hiring. So talk a bit about how he's even influencing the people that are going into the classrooms.
Exactly. So on the higher education front, tenure is another part of what Ron DeSantis is going after. I've talked to a number of experts and scholars who basically say they're not sure how successful he's going to be at this, but Ron DeSantis is saying, you know what? I think that a lot of professors are dead weight. They get tenure, they stop publishing, they stop producing, they're, taking up a lot of the state's funding and money. And so he's just like, we should develop a new system or shake up the system that's been in place for a long time and basically say that tenured professors should undergo review more often, so about every 5 years, and also that they should be able to be fired without cause, despite the fact that they have tenure. And that goes against what tenure fundamentally is.
Yeah, and we had this country had such a robust conversation about tenure when my friend Nicole Hannah-Jones, the creator of the 1619 Project, when she was denied tenure and ultimately ended up going to Howard University to start a journalism and democracy center because of what happened in North Carolina. But I digress. I want to talk to you a bit about eliminating DEI initiatives. What's the impact there? You touched on it in your first answer, but talk a bit more about what Ron DeSantis is doing, especially as it comes to Florida.
Absolutely. So beginning in January, a lot of professors just started getting online and speaking out and saying, I was just told that my email was getting searched. And the reason why it was being searched by administrators was because this professor was involved with coordinating DE&I programs. And apparently, a lot of those programs were canceled because of this order from Ron DeSantis this year. And so that was concerning because it's a space where a lot of teachers get together and just talk about initiatives, ways to make campus more inclusive for professors, for students. And so teachers with very little notice were told that these programs were not going to move forward. And I think relatedly, a number of university professors from, I want to say about 20 Florida State universities came together and signed a letter saying that they were going to really crack down on this and prevent teachers from continuing with these programs and making sure that D&I was not a part of curriculum or not a part of core classes that teachers were teaching students in Florida universities.
Yeah. You also make the really important point that this isn't also only about race. There's also that he's targeting, as you write, targeting trans healthcare, that the governor has instructed state universities to report on whether they're using public funding for gender affirming healthcare. So talk to me a bit about that.
Yeah, so this was very, very alarming for a lot of people who have been following Ron DeSantis's efforts against trans people. And so in January, one of his staff members basically sent a letter to 12 university presidents in Florida saying, we need you to report on how many trans people have been receiving healthcare in your clinics. So they wanted specific details about the kinds of procedures they were receiving, whether it was a surgical procedure, the kinds of medicine they were receiving, how many of them were diagnosed with gender dysphoria. And so that was just very scary, right? Because it's not clear yet what they're going to do with the evidence. But we know from what Ron DeSantis has done before that this is probably not going to be something that's in favor of trans rights and trans healthcare. Because, he's launched efforts and has tried to block, for example, Medicaid coverage for people seeking various surgeries.
Connected to that is this idea that there was so much pushback because Florida schools were trying to track menstrual cycles of teen girls. Now, my understanding is that effort has sort of been abandoned, but what's your sense of sort of how that fits into what we've been talking about?
Right. So a lot of people have been trying to say that that's not a Ron DeSantis initiative. It doesn't make sense. It's not connected to Ron DeSantis, right? Because it was the organization that was leading athletics for the state. So it's not connected to DeSantis, but a lot of people quickly drew a line between that and what Ron DeSantis has been doing. And so what this organization was suggesting was that in the routine questionnaire about just menstrual cycles, it's usually optional, that question of just how often do you get your menstrual cycle? But now they're saying this should be mandatory. And so even though that didn't go through, there's a chance that that could be presented again and adopted in the future. And that would just be another way that trans students are coming under attack for their participation in athletics.
Oh, such an important point to make there. You also write about reigning in a school that was considered progressive, New College of Florida. This is fascinating to me because it's a small college, but the governor is apparently getting quite involved here. Explain what's going on.
Yeah, so the New College of Florida, maybe they saw this coming, maybe they didn't, but it is happening. And Ron DeSantis has initiated what a lot of people are calling a hostile takeover, a conservative takeover of the campus. And what's especially concerning about this one is that New College it's a very small school, about 650 to 700 students. It was established in the late 60s, and over time, it's become a place, a safe haven for LGBTQ students. It's considered progressive for how academics are carried out on campus. Students aren't graded in the same way that they're graded at other institutions. And so this really is a haven for students who want to think progressively and kind of enter fields that, you know, maybe aren't related to STEM or aren't these what's traditionally considered core subjects. And so what Ron DeSantis has done is one of the first moves he did this year was step in and shake up the school's board. It's only 13 people, and he went in and appointed 6 new board members to the board. And so one of those board members is Christopher Rufo, and Rufo has gotten fame in the past 2 to 3 years because he's the guy who's behind the hysteria around critical race theory. And so critical race theory, right, is the academic concept that says that racism is endemic in the United States. But Rufo has kind of taken this and turned this into a war on wokeness, right? So anywhere where critical race theory might be taught, Christopher Rufo is saying this needs to stop. And so he's been credited with being the person who Donald Trump, you know, modeled his executive order from 2020 after. And so the fact that Christopher Rufo is now on the board of the school is very concerning to students. And so Christopher Rufo was there at the first board meeting of the year. Students were there protesting on campus because they were very concerned about what this new board would do. A lot of the people who DeSantis appointed are conservatives, are people who are his allies. And so one of the first things that they did as a new board was fire the school's president, who students loved, right? This was a woman who was celebrated. And so on her way out, she said that unfortunately, New College is just a lab right now for Ron DeSantis to test out his conservative ideas, to really try to make his vision for education play out. Because right, a lot of people have speculated that Ron DeSantis will maybe any day now announce that he's running for president of the United States. And so this is his chance to kind of show the rest of the country, to show conservatives across the country what he's capable of. And unfortunately, students at New College are the guinea pigs or collateral damage in those efforts.
I mean, it's just fascinating to think what he's doing at that school. I want to go back to the African American Studies, AP African American Studies course, because hundreds of people rallied this week against this. They rallied against Ron DeSantis' rejection of the AP course. I wonder how effective is the pushback against what Ron DeSantis is trying to do in that case, but also if you could even broaden it overall, like, is there an effective machine to push back against some of the things that we've been talking about?
Yeah, so a lot of people, like you said, have taken to the streets. They're online and just protesting what Ron DeSantis did. And so what happened was that last month, Ron DeSantis said that the new AP African American Studies course that's being piloted in 60 schools across America is not something that Florida would accept in its current state. He rejected the course and said that it has no significant educational value whatsoever because it contained concepts like intersectionality or wanted students to explore incarceration or reparations or systemic racism. And he said that this was indoctrination and wokeness that is masquerading as education. And so a lot of people are saying we're not sure how much Ron DeSantis, right? Because he's gone farther to say we're actually maybe going to do away with AP across the state in general. And so that's caused another level of uproar. And so it's not clear how much Ron DeSantis will actually be able to do when it comes to removing AP courses from high schools. But something the state can actually do is stop paying for AP courses, which cost around like $97 a test. So that might be a challenge. But in terms of the rollback of the course, it does, in fact, violate the law that Ron DeSantis passed last year. And so that is something that Ron DeSantis can do, say this course actually violates this divisive concepts law. And so this is something that can't happen in Florida. And so it's still left to be seen what the College Board is going to do to continue to fight back. They did issue a new statement this week saying we should have been better from the beginning with denouncing Ron DeSantis, pointing out that his book banning and censorship is a form of authoritarianism. And so this is a fight that's only just starting. And so we're going to see where Ron DeSantis goes next and how the College Board pivots to basically say that we're going to continue to fight Ron DeSantis. But I will also say that while there has been pushback to DeSantis is still saying they're going to reject the course. I just learned this morning that 600 high schools are getting ready to actually adopt the pilot course. So originally they were anticipating that it would be 200 schools that would take the course in this coming fall 2023, but now it's up to 600. So while DeSantis is pushing back, other conservative states are pushing back. We're seeing blue states really adopt and support this course.
Well, such fascinating and revealing reporting. Thank you so much, Fabiola, for all of your work and for sharing your reporting.
Thank you so much for having me, Yamiche.
And thanks, of course, all of you for watching Washington Week Recommends. You can find us here every Friday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. And tonight, be sure to tune in to Washington Week on PBS. We'll discuss the busy week of news for President Biden and former President Donald Trump. Hope to see you there. Domestic politics and foreign objects.
I will not allow this nation to fall.
President Biden focuses on the economy and pushes back on Republican demands for negotiations over raising the debt limit.
America is not past our prime. It's just that our politicians are past theirs.
And former governor of South Carolina and UN ambassador Nikki Haley challenges former President Trump in the race to be the GOP's presidential nominee. Plus,
they don't know what they are. They haven't told anybody. They haven't told us what it is.
I make no apologies for taking down that balloon.
after days of criticism, President Biden defends his handling of the Chinese spy balloon and downing of 3 other unidentified aerial objects. Next.
This is Washington Week. Corporate funding is provided by...
For 25 years, Consumer Cellular's goal has been to provide wireless service that helps people communicate and connect. We offer a variety of no-contract plans, and our U.S.-based customer service team can help find one that fits you. To learn more, visit consumercellular.tv.
Additional funding is provided by Koo and Patricia Ewan through the Ewan Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. Once again from Washington, moderator Yamiche Alcindor.
Good evening and welcome to Washington Week. It's been another busy week in news, and while we are a long, long way from 2024, we've got a preview this week of the messaging and challenges of the likely contenders. For his part, President Biden kept up his criticism of congressional Republicans trying to tie raising the debt ceiling to federal spending cuts. Here he is on Wednesday.
Some of our Republican friends in the House are talking about taking the economy hostage over the full faith and credit of the United States. I will not negotiate whether or not we pay our debt.
Biden, who has yet to formally announce he is running for re-election, has published the results of his latest physical from earlier this week. In the report, Dr. Kevin O'Connor said Biden, who has faced questions about his age, remains, quote, healthy and is, quote, fit to successfully execute the duties of the presidency. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump's list of challenges got longer as he again runs for president. On Tuesday, he got his first official challenger for the GOP's presidential nomination when Nikki Haley formally announced she is entering the race.
It's time for a new generation of leadership. You should know this about me. I don't put up with bullies. And when you kick back, it hurts them more if you're wearing heels.
Quite the announcement, and Trump did criticize that announcement in a way. On Wednesday, he told Fox News Digital, quote, I want her to follow her heart, even though she made a commitment that she would never run against who she called the greatest president of her lifetime. Meanwhile, on Thursday, a Georgia grand jury investigating Trump and his allies' efforts to overturn the 2020 election said one or more witnesses may have lied under oath while testifying. Joining me tonight to discuss this and more, Zolan Kanu-Youngs, White House correspondent for The New York Times, Scott MacFarlane, congressional correspondent for CBS News, Eva McKen, national politics reporter for CNN, and Ashley Parker, senior national political correspondent for The Washington Post. So thank you all for being here. Zolan, I want to start with you. What's the White House's thinking this week as President Biden was leaning into this economic message, leaning into going after Republicans on entitlements while they're juggling a whole lot?
Definitely juggling a whole lot. It's almost seems like a sort of unofficial start to some campaign messaging, possibly, for a likely re-election announcement, right? I mean, talking to people around the White House and allies of the Biden administration, this is really going to be the messaging going forward. For a while, particularly in the absence of former President Trump, who was an easy foe for them to contrast their agenda with, they've been looking for a foe. And in a way, they got it just before the midterms by pointing to some of these certain proposals coming from a limited number of members of the Republican Party. And by that, I mean sunsetting Medicare as well as Social Security. For those in the White House, just pointing that out and putting a spotlight on those plans basically allows you to contrast what some say is big spending, but also programs that they say will invest in making your quality of life better with those proposals that have been put forward. So while Republicans accuse the Biden White House of being irresponsible fiscally, the White House is saying, look, our policies, investing in infrastructure, capping insulin prices will improve your day-to-day lives, and look at these limited proposals. Now, of course, members of the Republican Party would say, the leaders of our party have already said that's off the table. But that still doesn't mean the messaging politically will be going away, especially for the White House going forward.
And Scott, it's interesting because what Zolan's talking about, it's really put Republicans on the defense in the middle of when they're supposed to be leaning into the fact that they have control of the House. But now you have Senator Rick Scott on the Senate side saying, I got to redo my policy. I'm not going to talk about cutting Social Security and Medicare. Talk to me a little bit about what you make of all this and the reporting on this.
Well, here we are now, about 2 or 3 weeks past the actual deadline to raise the debt ceiling. We've actually reached the max. They're buying us some time, but we've hit that deadline. And in the time since, we've spent these weeks talking about Social Security and Medicare. Who's winning the messaging battle so far, if that's the case? That's exactly the playing field on which Democrats want to have this argument. So that's already knocked the Republicans off message at a sensitive time because they now are controlling the U.S. House. They have this capacity and this platform with which to control the message and resonate their priorities. And instead, they're talking internally about Social Security and Medicare. So in the early stages of what's going to be a very dangerous war over the debt ceiling, it appears the administration and Democrats have the upper hand.
And this is a real dumpster fire for Senator Scott, right? He came up with this plan about a year ago, and now a year later, he is having to edit this in public. It's quite embarrassing. But I think it's not only a problem for him, it'll be a problem for a lot of Republicans because they have, in different iterations, I think, maybe not explicitly, but voiced some, support of reforming entitlements. Well, that, in essence, would be cutting Social Security and Medicare. And now they have to explain this. I think this conversation only becomes even more pronounced and problematic for them as we get more focused on coming up to the debt ceiling.
And you have to keep in mind that pre-Trump, reforming entitlements was sort of one of the key planks of being a Republican, right? So you have statements that Nikki Haley made, that Ron DeSantis made when Speaker Paul Ryan was advocating for some of these cuts, being quite in favor of them, that former President Trump is now leveraging as opposition against some of his Republican rivals or would-be rivals. But the party has shifted so quickly from entitlement reform to we're not going to touch any of this, which, again, as Owen said, makes sense politically, because if there's one thing we've learned, it's that voters hate things being taken away from them. Even voters who did not vote for President Obama, who hated Obamacare, when you actually tried to take away some of the health benefits that they were enjoying, they didn't like that either.
I mean, it's such a critical point when you think about what voters are thinking about and what's going to impact their lives. Zolan, I also want to come back to you because as we talk about health, of course, there was the physical exam that President Biden put out. He's healthy and vigorous. I hope my doctor would say that about me. Talk to me a bit about Democrats, though. Are they worried that this is the possible Achilles heel for President Biden? He's popular. I mean, his numbers obviously have been struggling sometimes, but he's popular among his own party. Talk to me about the decision to put this out, what this report might mean for him.
I mean, when you ask about any issue, when you ask the White House or allies of the president about any single topic, this is, I would say, the one they're most offensive about. It's a sensitive issue. Now, they would say, look, something that helped was the State of the Union, they would say. I think that many folks who plan on working on any potential campaign or are allied with this White House saw him going back and forth with Republicans, and a word that I continued to hear was agile, and it actually showed that energy was there. You know, they are planning a traveling blitz in the weeks ahead as well. But look, I mean, you can't deny that just when you look at polling data, this is also a concern among voters as well and Americans. It does help, though, that physical did come out. I will say I did some reporting this week going through previous presidents' physicals and just the history of presidential physicals. I think one thing that's important to say is it really doesn't tell you about anything 6 years down the line. It tells you maybe about something 1 year down the line. And also, just like any other patient, the person that has discretion to about what information is made public in that physical is the president at that point. So, you know, I don't know if just one single physical will eliminate all concerns around that issue.
Something that strikes me is Karine Jean-Pierre, the press secretary. She often says that they have a hard time keeping up with him. But he is going to he's going to have to be out here, especially if he announces he's running in 2024. He's going to have to do a lot of what we saw him doing this week, right? Speaking to union workers in places where he's very visible and touting the successes of the administration. And it's interesting as we think about this. I'm now, of course, in some ways wanting to transition to the challenges that we started talking about for former President Trump. And Scott, I mean, I was looking at the Georgia grand jury report, trying to figure out, okay, what's the news here? What do you think is the biggest part or the biggest takeaway of this report? Given the fact that we didn't really learn that much, other than the fact that we really learned that at least one person was accused of lying before this grand jury, and it's essentially committing perjury.
So they released part of this report, and ultimately this is like a college student's dream. Just 3 pages. You don't need to do anything more. Just give us a couple pages. You can double space it if you'd like to. That's what came out of the Georgia grand jury after the redactions that were ordered by the court. 2 key kernels to this thing. They say that the grand jury believes at least one, if not multiple, witnesses lied and should be prosecuted for it. Quite a statement to the district attorney in Fulton County, but also that it was clear to all grand jurors there was no widespread fraud that would have impacted the election. We already knew that, but at least the grand jury gives that more foundation and more credibility. This investigation seems to be moving quickly, though. I mean, this has been measured in months and not in the years it may take this grand jury in Washington investigating January 6th of the many years that have gone into the New York investigations. So in Fulton County, there should be and there is intense focus on what comes next.
And in some ways, what comes next, we think about the fact that the primary is just around the corner. You made the smart point to our producers that this isn't normal times. And of course, thinking about Nikki Haley, but also thinking about the fact that, as you said, there are people who are still protesting nightly in support of the January 6th defendants. So mesh these two things together. You have the Georgia grand jury that's looking at efforts to overturn the 2020 election. And then you have a Republican base that is still leaning into those same lies.
There's still a vitriolic election denialism throughout America. We see it manifest itself in Washington, D.C., just about a mile from the Capitol, outside the D.C. jail, where there's a number of January 6 defendants being held, awaiting trial. There are rallies there every night. There are supporters, and there are some defendants who are speaking with members of Congress, trying to get hearings and investigations into either what they characterize as Department of Justice overreach or mistreatment of the defendants in jail. But they now have a platform. They have a Republican majority with members who want to have hearings. And you have a candidate in the race who continues to deny the 2020 election results, has made that the forefront of his messaging, and now you'll have other contenders getting in who will have to answer the question, was the election legitimate, and is President Biden the duly elected U.S. president? And I'm not sure what they're going to answer.
You touched on this, but I also thought that was, and we've heard this before, but an interesting finding of the limited report that we got from the grand jury in Georgia, just the fact that the grand jury did not think that the election was fraudulent. They did not believe those claims. That was one of the findings there, too. There were, just when you look at the stats of Fulton County, I mean, we obviously don't know, but there's a chance that some of them would be Trump supporters, too. So that isn't good news for the president and his allies, that you could have Trump supporters on that grand jury that still don't believe these fraudulent claims of the election.
And picking up on that, I mean, this is a fascinating moment for the former president in the Republican primary, because Trump is as weak as he has ever been in certain ways. And I just spent a couple of weeks ago, I spent a couple days in 2 Pennsylvania counties talking to more than 36 Trump voters who voted for him in 2016. Many of them voted for him again in 2020, although not all of them. And what's interesting is when you ask them, who do you want to be the Republican nominee in 2024, a lot of them say, you know, I personally like Trump. I thought he did a great job, but I would rather see someone else, because I just think, and they don't blame Trump, right? They say the media has just been so unfair to him. The Democrats are so unfair. We, you know, some other voters think he's a little too divisive. So I would prefer someone who has a better chance of winning. So on the one hand, there's a really strong lane for a challenger. The flip side is they also, with a few exceptions, say, but if he runs again, he's my guy. I will absolutely 100% support him. So he has this floor he is not going to fall behind, which makes him pretty potent. But he also, there's people who are looking for something new. And the question is, as we were talking about right before the show started, do Republicans recreate 2016 where there's 16 challengers, Trump gets his 35%, and everyone else gets 7%, 15%, splits the vote, and he wins again? Or does the field clear and we get to see a Trump DeSantis, a Trump Haley, a Trump whoever matchup, which would make him probably the most vulnerable he's been?
Winner-take-all primaries,
right,
where 35% is as good as having 100%, because you get all the delegates even with a smaller plurality.
But so then, of course, I want to ask you, of course, as you jump in, talk to me about Nikki Haley and what she means, especially as she's doing this balancing act where she's talking about the fact that she wants to be recognized as a daughter of Indian immigrants. She wants to talk about the fact that she's a woman. She could kick harder in heels, but she's against identity politics. She's going after the 1619 Project and the consequences of slavery. She's doing this balancing act. She's also not going after Trump directly, but saying at one point we should go past the, quote, stale names of the past. So Eva, break this down.
Yeah, she wants all of the things. Listen, ultimately, she was trying to make this generational argument. When she's asked about Trump, she says she doesn't kick sideways, she kicks forward, and she'll focus her energy and her attacks on President Biden. She says she's not going to invoke identity politics, but she did elevate a lot in her remarks that she is a proud daughter of immigrants as well as a woman. The most fascinating, I think, part of her rollout to me is just this real emphasis on America, her argument that America is not a racist country. I have covered many conservative Republican rallies, most recently a lot of Herschel Walker rallies in Georgia last year, and unprompted, conservatives will say to me, I won't even be asking them about race, and they'll say, well, Republicans are not racist, conservatives are not racist. They just want me to know that. And so Nikki Haley really was speaking, I think, to those sensibilities and that anxiety there. And I think that she's probably smart to make it a central focus of her campaign because it really does appeal to, I think, a significant amount of white conservatives.
She also used it to attack President Biden and the current White House, saying at one point implying that President Biden has said the country's racist. Just a fact check, he was asked that, I believe, in 2021, and he actually refused to say that. He said that he did not believe the country was racist. And then he quickly went into the history of Jim Crow and what have you. But I remember she mentioned that as well, and just a fact check there, that was false.
And Scott, what's interesting also is that some of the bigger names that we've been talking about, Ron DeSantis, Mike Pence, maybe even Mike Pompeo, actually the list can go on and on, they haven't jumped into this race. What do you think that means for the way that things are shaping up?
It just feels like, as Ashley described, that the more lanes that get filled, the more advantageous this is to former President Trump. No matter what other names are in there, because the more finally you divide this layer, the more slices you put in that pie, the more impressive and intimidating that 35% is. So it's not even a matter of who, it's a matter of how many. And I can't imagine Donald Trump trying to scare people off at this point, because it could be the best thing to happen to his calculus politically.
Yeah. I want to turn to another subject that we can't get away from, and that is that on Thursday, President Biden gave a speech on the shooting down of the Chinese spy balloon and the 3 other unidentified objects. While defending his decisions, the president said the 3 objects were probably not used for spying. Take a listen.
I've directed my team to come back to me with sharper rules, distinguishing between those that are likely to pose safety and security risks. But make no mistake, if any object presents a threat to the safety and security of the American people, I will take it down.
Zolan, we just can't get away from this topic. And President Biden, he spoke out because there was a lot of criticism from Democrats and Republicans that he wasn't saying enough about this. So why did he decide to speak out now, and how's the White House viewing this?
Well, there was criticism building, not just the first week of this. It was almost the White House isn't being aggressive enough. You allowed this the Chinese spy balloon to go across the country, waited too long. Then the criticism started to shift and more people came in. And now today I heard questions in the briefing room of was there a possible overreaction in shooting down these 2 second objects that we don't seem to know what they are. There's a report I saw, and there's a hobby club that says maybe it was one of my handmade balloons in Illinois. We don't know if that's confirmed. John Kirby said that he had read that report, but could not confirm it as well. The U.S. still doesn't know exactly what these materials are. So you saw people members of Congress start to join in and really questioning just the ambiguity around the strategy here. And I think what hangs over this in a way is one, you do have Republicans that are trying to show that they are more hawkish on China and trying to show that the White House is not being aggressive enough when it comes to competition with China. But 2, you also have this new dynamic when it comes to this competition between these 2 superpowers of this thing called near space, right, which is above us, where there really are no borders, there really are no lines, depicting different sovereign countries, where it's almost a free-for-all of military devices at this point. And I think that is going to be a question going forward of how members of Congress come together after this incident in governments in trying to establish rules governing that area.
And actually, just talk about the politics of this, especially as we think about the president's relationship with China and him and President Xi not wanting to really get into a situation where they're too adversarial, even as he says that, of course, the competition that we should be looking at globally is China.
Right. Well, you saw the vice president in Munich for the security conference saying that this balloon was not helpful. That's quite obvious. But you also, on the flip side, had President Biden saying, look, I don't think that President Xi of China wants to blow up this relationship, right? Yeah. So they have an incentive to try to be competitors, to be geopolitical foes, but to try to work together.
Yeah. What we also saw, though, is this president and I think this administration not want to be bullied. and come forward before they were ready, before they really knew what they were talking about. Imagine if the last week of January he was out here making declarative statements and he turned out to be wrong. So I think that is what we saw, sort of this balancing act in real time.
I think as the weekend did, we saw a separation between the spy balloon and the other balloons, the UFOs. I got to tell you. My kids think Daddy's work is boring until I mention I'm covering UFOs today. Suddenly, I got their attention and some credibility with the kids. Congress has reverted to its more comfortable position where, by the end of the week, when they recognized these 3 other flying objects were not necessarily a danger to society, they got to complain about process, which is what Congress loves to do. They didn't get the information to which they felt they were entitled as quickly as they felt they were entitled to it, and that always rankles Congress in a uniquely powerful way.
And I mean, this obviously the topic is one that we could talk about for a while, but before the show ends, Scott, I want to just recognize that Senator John Fetterman, he is someone who is now disclosing that he's going to be treated for clinical depression. I'm thinking about his family. He's in my heart because he's had to deal with so much. Politics aside, as someone who's survived a stroke is dealing with issues. What do you make of the fact that he's disclosing this and the real challenges that he's facing?
I think there is a bipartisan appreciation that he made a public announcement to reduce the stigma which prevents some people from getting the care they need. But 2 numbers jump out at me. The National Institutes of Health says 20 million Americans had an episode of depression in 2020, and 1 in 3 patients who are recovering from a stroke have suffered depression. So those numbers make clear that John Fetterman is joining publicly a very large club of Americans.
And it's in some ways striking when you think, Ashley, about the fact that he's saying, I'm having problems in a city where a lot of people don't say that. We have a lot of elected officials who are dealing with all sorts of problems who don't talk about it.
Well, it's very Gen Z of him in a certain way, right? To publicly, actively seek the mental help that he needs. And you don't see a lot of politicians doing that. But I think that is why, in a bipartisan way, I was struck by when everyone responded to this, or almost everyone, it was with empathy. It was with words like, this is brave. They appreciate him coming forward and getting the help they need, because to those stats that Scott cited, this is something that a lot of people grapple with daily in a very private way. And I think, like many of those things, they appreciate it when they feel a bit less alone. And when you have a U.S. Senator doing that, he's helping himself, and he's also helping inadvertently a lot of other people by making them feel less alone.
We should underscore he has access to care, which
That
how
too.
many Americans
Yeah.
can't get? How hard is it to get on the wait list for a therapist? How hard is it to get access for your insurance to pay for mental health care coverage? Just underscores that John Fetterman is fortunately getting the access he needs.
You have about 10 seconds left.
Yeah, having covered him a little bit in Erie and in Pittsburgh during the election, he was accessible. That's constantly what I heard from voters. Like, they felt like they could connect with him regardless of party. They saw themselves in him. So I think him disclosing that he has depression is just an extension of that accessibility of voters feeling as though he is within reach.
And him really leaning into the idea that he wants to tell people and be transparent about what he's dealing with. I mean, I said again, I will think about his family and definitely am hoping that he gets all the help that he needs, Senator. We'll have to leave it there for now. Thank you to my panel for joining us and for sharing your reporting on a number of topics. And don't forget to watch PBS News Weekend on Saturday for the latest from Ukraine as the war-torn country prepares to mark the first anniversary of the Russian invasion. I'm Yamiche Alcindor. Good night from Washington.
Corporate funding for Washington Week is provided by
For 25 years, Consumer Cellular has been offering no-contract wireless plans designed to help people do more of what they like. Our U.S.-based customer service team can help find a plan that fits you. To learn more, visit consumercellular.tv.
Additional funding is provided by Koo and Patricia Ewan through the Ewan Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
watching PBS.